With an iconic computer such as the Apple IIe, they were bound to be imitators and clones, and I've seen a lot of them in the time here at Vintage Geek. But today we're covering one of the weirdest Apple clones I've ever seen, the Unitron. Just a quick reminder, if you like vintage technology and computers, be sure to like and subscribe, and also be sure to check out vintagegeek.com. We always appreciate new members. If you watch the channel at all, you're probably very familiar with our love for the Apple product line, and especially the Apple II and Apple IIe. It's an iconic system, and it was part of my childhood, and honestly, many of the guests that have come through that we've talked to here on the channel. Over the years, of course, there have been a number of different clones for the Apple II product, and understandably so. The price point of the original Apple II was out of reach for most families, and everyone loved it in the classroom and seeing it outside of the home, so to get it inside the home, companies were working hard to come up with clones that would be a little bit cheaper and a way to get into the home market. The various companies, some of which we've talked about before, like the Laser 128 and the Franklin Ace, were some pretty common competitors for the Apple, but when it comes to clones, those weren't the only options, and we have today a very unique piece that was actually brought to us thanks to a contributor, one of our loyal video watchers, Jeffrey Lewis. We want to thank him for pointing out this auction in Virginia that had this very strange looking Apple II clone. And I wasn't even sure when I saw the pictures originally if this actually was an Apple II clone. It certainly looked like it with the discs that came with it, which was kind of the dead giveaway, but the rest of the hardware looked a bit unfamiliar, and that's because it looks different than any clone that I've ever seen before. First and foremost, it's in a metal case that has wooden side panels, and these are in fact real wood side panels, which is really interesting. The case itself and the keyboard don't really look like anything I've seen before. In fact, a lot of the Apple clones actually tried to use the same case design as the Apple IIe, and we've seen that in some of the other systems. In the case of this particular Apple clone, I really couldn't identify it from the pictures. The keyboard itself is very strange. It has a number pad on the right-hand side that doesn't really have numbers on it. It looks like it has faded letters, almost like someone took the keys off of another keyboard and attached them onto this one, which is pretty strange. The keyboard layout on the left-hand side is also a little bit weird. It has 4 function keys that I can't tell what they are anymore because they're faded off, and it has an interesting arrangement of the caps lock and the shift key and several of the other keys on the keyboard, which just make it unique and distinctive. The case itself is metal, so the actual plate and the plate above the keyboard are actually made of metal, almost giving it that feel like maybe it was some kind of a project box you would buy in a kit or something at the time, and someone actually cut out the hole for the keyboard and the various LEDs and switches. I'm not really sure. Again, this is just a very unique design. The system came with a Zenith monitor, looked like the monochrome version that had the 40 and 80 column mode. That monitor did not power up. We did try it, and it seems to be completely dead, so we're gonna have to bring that one back to the shop and see what we can do with it. It also came with a floppy disk drive that I am unfamiliar with as well. This one's made by a manufacturer called Rana Systems, and I'm not even sure if I'm pronouncing that right. And it's an interesting looking disk drive in that it's a little bit taller than the normal Apple form factor, and it does have a couple of extra LEDs and indicators. One of them is a protection indicator, it appears, and the other one is a busy indicator. The disk drive itself seems like it may need some cleaning and work. I was unable to get that disk drive to power up at all, and putting the disks in it was a little bit challenging. It seems like there's a protection latch or something inside that just wasn't really working right, but we wanted to see what is inside this unusual Apple clone case. When you start digging into it and you take the metal cover off, you can see that it has a blue printed circuit board inside. It's pretty nondescript. It looks like a kind of standard motherboard. It has a lot of empty ROM slots, which is kind of interesting, and they seem to be hand labeled on the ones that are there. There is one indication on the board that finally gave me a hint as to what this system is, and it's in very small print, and it simply says Unitron. Now this led to a little bit of a Google search. There's a very small amount of information available online on the Unitron system, but from what I've read, they actually did make 2 compatible Apple boards over the years. Unitron was a company based in Taiwan, and I'm not sure the story, obviously, of how this particular motherboard ended up in Virginia, but there was a name actually written on the motherboard on a hand label, so I assume that this was a hobbyist or someone that was into computers at the time that decided to take matters into his own hands and build his own Apple II clone. There's also a couple of cards that were in the system. One of them was the actual controller card for the Rana Systems floppy drive, and that floppy drive, as I mentioned, is not working. The other card is a Microsoft card card, which I believe is the CPM card. So you could actually run CPM programs on an Apple II. Those are the only two cards that are in the system. There's a joystick port that's just a cable physically connected to the motherboard. And of course, there's your standard ports for composite output and your audio in and out for a cassette deck. The power supply also looks generic, probably made either by Unitron or by some other manufacturer. And there seems to be some custom wiring for an LED on the front panel, as well as a push button type switch, which from what I can tell may have been what engaged the CPM card from Microsoft. And that's just based on the LED behavior when you actually push that button. Overall, the system is still a bit of a mystery to me, and I would very much welcome anyone that knows anything about the Unitron boards to please leave a note in the comments. Tell us what you know about it. If you have any experience with this or you've seen one before. The pictures that I saw online of the other Unitron systems, though, did show more of a standard Apple II type case. That is not the case with this. Someone here actually bought the motherboard and put it what appears to be in their own case. So it's just an interesting computer mystery here at Vintage Geek, and I want to fire this machine up and be able to run some of the software that came with it, which was actually pretty extensive. There were a number of floppy disks. Some of them I'd seen before, some of them are handwritten. The majority of them seem to be homebrew disks, but there's a few that I'd like to take a look at today on this system. In order to get this working, we had to swap out the floppy drive card with the standard Apple II model that we had on our working machine. That gave us a working floppy drive, and we are using the Apple II original monitor here, as the Zenith monitor that came with it did not function. But other than that, the computer does seem to work and it does power on. So first and foremost today, I'd like to try the disc that was physically in the disk drive when we bought this from the auction, and that was a home labeled disc labeled Games 5. Looks like it has a few different games on it, and I'd like to see what that plays like on this original Unitron Apple clone. So let's fire it up and see what happens. Right off the bat, I noticed that the label at the top actually says Decider. That's normally where the Apple II would have shown up on the original system. So I'm guessing that that's a bootleg ROM or something that they pirated. Now we've got Game Diskette Volume 2. Apparently it was labeled incorrectly. This is Volume 2. It said 5 on the label. But we've got, looks like 5 different games in a menu here. Outpost, Galactic Empire, Crossfire, Starfire, and Viper. Well, let's just see what Outpost looks like. We'll start with the letter A. Well, we might start with the letter A. Let's see. Maybe I have to use the arrow keys. Well, if I can figure out where the arrow keys are on this keyboard. Well, D appears to work, so we're gonna try that one. Let's play a little Starfire. Well, we do have a screen full of stars here. It's a little bit off center on my monitor. So it does appear that the joystick is moving around. It looks like an enemy right there, but can I fire at it? It's worth noting here that the capture from this particular system seems to be a little jittery, and I'm not sure if that's because this is using kind of clone-based components in the system. Now see, it looks like I've got this guy in my targets, but maybe it's just firing very slowly. Game over. It also appears that for some reason when we're capturing the composite off this device, we are getting a color image, whereas the screen, which is a color monitor from Apple, is only getting the black and white image, which is a little bit strange. I wonder how you start the game. There isn't even an escape key. Well, I'll be honest, I don't know how to get out of this game. It seems like the keyboard may not be fully responsive in this system. I'm not sure if there are some keys that are just not working, or maybe they're all working, but there's some conflict in the software. I'm really not sure. We also don't know if there's any conflict with using a real Apple II disk controller, or if having the other off-branded systems made some difference in how things loaded. These are all things that I don't know about this particular system, but there's no escape. I think we may need to try another game. One of the things I learned online when reading about the Unitron system was from a person who had one of these as a kid and ended up becoming an electrical engineer later in his life. And he said that all the years he'd used the Unitron, he didn't realize until he got a real Apple II later on, just the quality difference in the two products. And we may be seeing some of that today with how it loads programs, and it's maybe not fully compatible with all of the original Apple II software. But we're still in the home labeled discs, and I'd like to try another one. This one is simply Games number 1, so let's see what this boots up to. Catch-up running. Okay, this one's got a little bit different menu system. Type letter to run or 0 to exit. We got Hello, Blitz, Beer Run, Star Thief, Sab Main, Raster Blaster, Hangman, Phone List, and Print Disc Label. Well, I mean, Beer Run, let's see what that looks like. I think there might be something wrong with the C key. Blitz? Well, that did something, but it didn't actually. Type letter to run or 0 to exit. Well, the page ahead just reloads the screen here. Seems like the numeric keys are actually working. The page up and page back are working okay. I don't really want to try delete or rename in case those actually work. How about unlock? Well, let's see if we can unlock C. No? B? Ketchup terminated. The system keeps getting weirder. See, I think there's something wrong with the keyboard though, because it's not, okay, so some characters are working. A doesn't work, B doesn't work, C doesn't work, D does work. Yeah, so far we've got D, J, E, M that are functional. It almost feels like the keyboard may have separate registers for different sets of letters, and there may only be a few of these that are functional at the moment. I also noticed that there was a connector inside that connected what I presume is supposed to be an interface to the keyboard from that Microsoft card. I don't know if that might be having something to do with it either. We're basically working with complete unknowns here, so this is all a bit of a mystery. I think I'm going to try another one of the discs, but this time I'm going to try one of the kind of pre-labeled non-homebrew discs just to see if it will load it. We don't have a fully working keyboard, so that may be very limiting depending on the software, but maybe we can at least get something to load properly. Next up, we have a disc called Krell's Logo for the Apple II. Now this appears to be a factory-made disc. It's not a homebrew one, and I'm assuming this is a version of the Logo programming language. There were also a couple of other discs in the pack that have to do with this that we can try if this happens to work, so let's give this a shot. That was a little aggressive. Krell presents, interestingly enough, in this particular software's case, we're getting a normal screen on the actual Apple monitor, but now on the capture, we're just kind of getting offset and just some weird garbled information. So I guess this is just an example of these kind of imitation chipsets and what they're actually doing. It's good to know that the maximum reward on this is $1,000 though for pirated copies of the software. Definitely keep that in mind. It appears that we've gone to a logo prompt on the screen, which means that this is expecting some kind of commands, which I don't know. And we don't have a working keyboard, which is going to make this even harder. Because if I try to put in L for left or down, well, maybe down. Oh, the enter key is not working though. Backspace works sometimes. The Unitron, frustration for everyone. Just on the off chance that the other software for Logo may have a pre-working program that you don't have to put commands into, I'm gonna try loading the other Logo disc we have, which is called Alice in Logoland, and I do love the title of that, just to see if maybe something will load automatically without requiring commands, because that is becoming a very tall order very quickly. All right, so this is a Logo files disk, and I have to assume that these different Logo files are all for Alice in Logoland, which would be the AIL 1 through 21. I'm not sure what you're supposed to do at this point though. Oh, well, spacebar works. Well, there's a lot of different shape files. That's pretty cool. All right, so we've got a prompt. I was afraid that was gonna happen. Eee. Oh, interesting. This time I hit backspace and it changed to a %sign. You just never know what's gonna happen when you're using a Unitron. This may be an exercise in futility. I think probably the best option at this point is to try some piece of software that's designed to auto-load. And the only way that I have a surefire way of doing that is using a factory disk that did not come with the system. Let's see if we can load a piece of software by Datamost. We've talked about Datamost here on the channel before, and we've actually had an interview with Peter from Datamost in a previous video, so we're a little bit familiar with their titles, but most of them will load automatically and don't require any additional input, so I'm gonna give this one a try. It's called, appropriately at this point, Pandora's Box, and we're gonna give this a shot here on our Unitron Apple clone. Well, we're looking great so far. Oh, well, we've got an image, Pandora's Box. Well, I love the animation to start out the game, but I already see a problem, and that is that it's going to require us to press the escape key to play. And looking at this keyboard, I actually don't see an escape key anywhere on it. There's no escape! In any case, we are unable to actually get into Pandora's Box here, but we have opened Pandora's Box by trying to get this system to work from beginning. Well, I have to say that my first experience with the Unitron Apple clone has not been spectacular, although it is a great example of what can go wrong when you don't have a working keyboard in a system. It's very hard to test various functions, and it's even harder to find sometimes a piece of software that doesn't require at least that initial keyboard input to get started. But it's a really interesting system, and I'm glad that we have it in the collection. If any of you out there watching this have any information on the Unitron system, the motherboards, the components, or maybe had a Unitron computer and can shed a little bit more light on the company or your experiences, we would love to hear from you. It's also a great time to bring up the Vintage Geek website. If you haven't checked it out yet, please go there, vintagegeek.com. You can see a little bit more detail about the museum, which is now open for scheduled tours. You can book those tours there, and more importantly, you can become a Vintage Geek member. We have an entire community section there just for sounding off on projects like this. If you're into the systems, if you have more information, we really encourage you to become a member. Not only is it going to help us out a lot, but it helps the community grow, and we all learn a little bit more about some of these vintage machines. Until next time, I'm Aaron, and this has been Vintage Geek.